The process of creating a pivot chart is relatively simple and straightforward. That is, assuming that the source pivot table has been well conceived and structured. Actually, the ease of creating a pivot chart is irrelevant to the structure of the underlying data table, but the functionality of the resulting chart is definitely reliant on what's been done in the pivot table first. We currently have a file opened called Pivot Table, Pivot Charts. It has a single pivot table that's already been configured and simplified and arranged and all of those wonderful things for us. We simply need to make a pivot chart from it. Regardless of the simplicity or complexity of the pivot table, the source pivot table needs to be selected. With the cursor placed anywhere within the pivot table, a pivot chart can be created in just a couple of clicks and in just a couple of ways. First of all, it would make sense if we're going to create a pivot chart to think it has something to do with the contextual tabs. And indeed, if we select the Analyze tab, we can select the Pivot Chart option from the Tools group that's near the right-hand side of the ribbon. What may be not so intuitive is that we also can create the chart by going to the Insert tab. Now, this is how we normally insert things onto worksheets. And there's no difference here. We simply have to look for the right option, which we may have just overlooked before. If we go to the Charts group, we will actually see a specific element for the pivot chart. This requires one extra click because we need to display the drop-down and see that we could create a pivot chart and pivot table both at the same time if we were working with the true source data. Since we already have the pivot table, we're going to go ahead and click Pivot Chart. Both of these methods end up with exactly the same result, which is displaying the Insert Chart dialog. If this window looks familiar, it should. It's exactly the same window we see whenever we insert any type of chart in Excel. Likewise, the options available are exactly the same. There is an entire learning series devoted completely to working with charts, so we definitely will not be exploring all of the options and all of the features. In fact, we're really not going to explore any of them. Our goal here is to focus specifically on which features and options are applicable to pivot charts, as opposed to traditional ones. With that said, let's go ahead and make a chart. And we're going to keep it simple. We'll just simply select the default column chart, move to the bottom right side of the window, and click or tap OK so that the chart can be created. By default, the new chart is embedded onto the current worksheet along with the pivot table. If we don't like this, we can certainly relocate it in all of the ways that we already know how. In order to keep our screen clear and easy to see, we're going to go ahead and move it to its own worksheet by activating the Pivot Chart Tools Design tab. Then selecting the Move Chart option from the far right-hand edge of the ribbon, and saying that we would like to put it into its own sheet. There we go. That's a little bit better. Makes things a little bit easier to see. Now, other than the chart itself, which appears as we would expect based on the options that we chose to create it, we notice that there are several buttons and options available. They show up in gray in several different areas around the chart. We also notice on the upper right-hand corner that we have some different buttons. These may vary a little bit depending on which version of Excel you're actually using. We also see on the right hand of the screen that we have an old friend that has reappeared, the Pivot Chart Field pane. Using all of these options is a topic of another video, but for now, you should feel confident that you have been able to create a brand new pivot chart based on a pivot table that includes yet-to-be-discovered functionality that makes the chart similar to the underlying pivot table itself, but in a more visual way.